David here with Figboot on Pens, back again with another ink review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at a scented ink from Blackstone called Wild Orange. This was something a little new to me. I hadn't played around with a scented ink before. And make sure to stay tuned because later on in this video I will be announcing my latest puzzle contest, and you don't want to miss out on that. Thanks go out to Lemur Ink for providing this ink for review. I'll put a link below in the notes to the Lemur Ink site where you can find this ink. Blackstone is a company based in Australia, and they got their start back in 2014. At that time, the range of fountain pen inks available in Australia was very limited, and they cost about 2 or 3 times more than what they cost in the US, Japan, and in Europe. And there was no Australian-made fountain pen inks on the market. They work closely with the fountain pen network community during the creation and testing phase of their initial production and have gone on to produce a number of series of inks. The ink we're going to take a look at today, Wild Orange, was part of their Scents of Australia series, which was released in 2017 and featured a range of scented inks based on native Australian plants. Now, the Australian Wild Orange is not actually a citrus. It's not related to the common orange. It's actually a member of the caper family. So, in order to take a look at this unique ink, please join me over here at camera 2. So, here is what the bottle looks like. They put a great deal of thought into this bottle. The benefits of using this polypropylene bottle over a glass bottle is that it's virtually indestructible. You can throw this on the floor and it won't break, and you really can't do that with a glass bottle. It can also be frozen without adverse effect, which is beneficial, especially if you're shipping around the world during winter. I haven't experienced it myself, but I have heard horror stories of inks freezing in the mail. I will say that I have experienced some crustiness around the cap of this orange ink. Orange inks are notorious for crusting up a bit. I haven't seen any crusting in a pen, which is a good thing though. In regard to what the color looks like, here is a swab. It's an orange with some brownish and red undertones. And here are some comparisons. Here what it looks like with the Mont Blanc Lucky Orange. Then here it is with Robert Oster's Pen Addict Fire on Fire. The Ackerman Orange Bovin. You can see these are much more vibrant oranges, but things that are a little bit more of a comparison, we have something like the Mandarin Orange from Monteverde, which is pretty close. Noodler's Apache Sunset is kind of in the range, but something very similar is Papier Plume's House of the Rising Sun. That's pretty close, maybe not quite as dark, but at least in the same neighborhood. And this is what some swatches look like on some Tomoe River 52 gram paper. Now, this is a Q-tip swab, and this is a smear with a letter opener, and then here are some drops with a syringe. Now, while the swabs were generous, there is only a little bit of bleed through, but the drops seem to go right through this paper. But that's not a real performance metric of this ink, but I thought that it was interesting that the drops ended up being considerably darker than the swabs. You can see here in the swabs that they have a bit of shade to them, but the drops are basically all shade. And in regard to the scented aspects of this ink, I do find that while it is wet, it does have a bit of a citrus smell to it. But then once it's dry, I find that that smell dissipates and it's really hard to pick up. So while it's wet, you can smell a bit of citrus on there. So let's take a look at a writing sample. This is Blackstone Wild Orange. This is on some Rhodia 80 gram paper. I find that the ghosting and bleed through is low. You can see here on this thicker paper that even with the swab, there's just a very tiny bit about a ghosting, but there's no bleed through whatsoever. The shade I find to be a bit medium, and there's very low sheen in regard to this ink. Okay, so the pens that I am going to be using today, the first one here is one I picked up in Atlanta from the Carolina Pen Company, and this is their Charleston model. And this was a custom color made by Jonathan Brooks for another one of his customers, and he had some leftover material, and so he made a couple of other pens for this as well. But I just think this is amazing. These coppers and then this vibrant blue, I just think it is amazing. And then and this one is a fine nib. And then next up, we have a pen from the Heinz Pen Company, and this is their Elementar model, and this is a broad nib. I just thought that this orange was appropriate to use for this orange ink. And then for the medium, which is actually the nib on this writes a little bit more than broad, so that's why I actually had this one kind of as the thicker of the three samples. And this is the Pineider La Grande Bellezza, and this is a very nice pen that I will be reviewing sometime in the future. But the nib is fairly flexible and can give you a very wide line. Now, since this is an ink from Australia, I wanted to discuss one of my favorite Australian films. I really debated about this one for a while because Australia has produced some great films. Walkabout, Mad Max. I was very close to picking Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, which is an outstanding movie that I love. But my favorite Australian film is one you might not have heard of. It's called Flirting. And to start off with, we will use the Carolina Pen Company pen. Flirting is a coming-of-age story about two teenagers in a private school, actually competing private schools, or schools that are across the river from each other, a lake rather, in Australia in the 1960s. The main story revolves around a white boy and an African girl who fall in love, all while doing a little growing up at the same time. And for the next writing, we have the Heinz pen. Flirting was an early film from several well-known actors. The film stars Noah Taylor and Thandie Newton, and has Nicole Kidman in a small supporting role. It was actually funny because while Flirting was in production, Kidman's career kind of took off after an acclaimed part in the film Dead Calm. As a result of her burgeoning fame, Kidman received top billing in the film and was prominently featured in all of the advertisings, even though she only was in a few scenes. And then finally, we have the Pineider. Flirting isn't a superficial teen movie. The characters have depth, and they also deal with important issues like race relations. So it's a movie that I would highly recommend. That in regard to ink flow, I find the ink flow to be good. For drying time, both with a fine as well as with a broad nib, I find that it dries in about 15 seconds. Blackstone inks are pH neutral and they are vegan friendly, not containing any animal-derived ingredients. This Wild Orange is a highly saturated brown, red, orange ink. And then finally, this ink has behaved well on all paper that I've tested. So let's actually take a look at a water test here. Drop a few water droplets on here. And while that sits, let's take a look at some chromatography. You can see the colors separate into some darker and lighter browns and some pinkish reds. I just like watching the time lapse of these chromatography tests. I think they're kind of cool. And then this is what the strip looked like after it dried. You can kind of see the different shades of brown and then kind of the pinkish red as well. In regard to this water test, that it seems like some of the darker colors held up a little bit better, but by no means would I call this waterproof or water resistant at all. Blackstone Wild Orange retails for $12 on the Lemur Ink site. There is a link below in the notes where you can check it out on the Lemur Ink site. And now for the information regarding the latest puzzle contest. Now, I've had a couple of previous puzzle contests that I felt were a bit too easy. There were a large number of people who came up with the correct answer. The idea with these puzzle contests is that it rewards folks for going the extra mile to solve a puzzle, and that there might be less entries than a standard contest I run on my channel. Thus, your odds of winning would be higher. I ramped up the difficulty on my last puzzle and made it a bit too difficult. No one could solve it until I provided a couple of hints. Well, I would say that this puzzle is a bit more straightforward, and I don't feel it's as difficult as the last one, but it still should be a challenge. This is what you need to do. Beginning with the Monteverde Regatta video, there are clues hidden in each of the 15 videos from then until this very video. The order of the videos is very important to being able to determine the correct answer. The challenge is to decipher the clues and come up with an answer. The answer will be the name of the prize that will be given away. If you solve the puzzle correctly, the answer will be obvious and no guessing should be involved. Something very important. In hindsight, I realized I actually made an error that I cannot go back and correct. So listen closely. In the Pilot Custom 74 video, the number 22 should have been 15. I'll put a reminder in the comments for that video, but ignore the 22 and replace it with the number 15. Sorry about that. This will be my 5th puzzle contest, and these are rather complicated to put together, and this was my very first mistake I've made on one, so forgive me. Once you have solved the puzzle, email your answer to figbootonpens@gmail.com. The deadline to enter is end of day on Tuesday, July 16th, so you'll basically have a week to work on this. At that point, I will have a random drawing from the correct answers, and the best of luck to you. So, that'll do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.